Hello, do this video about how to configure an Azure AD Sync Simulation with an OfficeExpert. So let's start with some theoretical information first. What you see here is basically the idea of how an Azure AD Connect Sync Simulation works. So you have on the one hand side your on-prem Active Directory, where all your end users are registered. In the middle you have the AD Connect Server, so the synchronization server, which takes care of the sync between your on-prem Active Directory and the Azure AD in the cloud. So the last element is basically the Azure AD in the cloud. So what OfficeExpert does with the Connect Sync Simulation is something like modifying an existing on-prem Active Directory user object. As a second step, he's checking the sync interval of the Connect server. And as a third step, he will then check if the user object, the modified user object, is already synchronized successfully with the cloud. And because he doesn't want to check the cloud immediately after he has modified the user object, the sync interval of the Connect server is essential here, because OfficeExpert knows that, for instance, Connect server interval is set to 30 minutes, so it makes no sense to check the cloud within the next 30 minutes. So he needs to check it maybe in 35 or even 1 hour. So that's the reason why we are reading the sync interval out of the Connect server. So this is the general idea behind of the sync simulation. So modifying an existing document in on-prem Active Directory and verifying if it's there in the Azure AD Cloud. If not, trigger any alert and notification to the administrator if a certain amount of thresholds have been exceeded. So that's the idea. So let's switch to the configuration. So if I switch to configuration and you click on settings and simulations, you will find here Azure Sync Simulation. In my case, I have configured already one. So let's talk a bit about that. So basically you have exactly those three elements. So you have the starting point, the Active Directory server. So in my case, that's the Active Directory server name. Because we are modifying the user object on the AD server, it requires that we do this via PowerShell. So therefore, remote PowerShell needs to be enabled and active on the Active Directory server. So you specify the port and you specify user object. And the user object needs to be needs to have sufficient access in order to connect remotely and to modify the user object in the Active Directory. You can verify the connection here. So in order to activate remote PowerShell board, there is a documentation in our K-base explaining what kind of options you can do. So the non-encrypted communication way, which just those two PowerShell commands are necessary. If you want to have an encrypted communication between over the remote PowerShell call, then you need to configure certain SSL keys, which is explained and described in this kind of documentation here. So Active Directory is one element. And then we have the Connect server, so different host, but the same procedure. We are pulling the configuration, the interval information via remote PowerShell call with the same user object or with a different one. Then user profile for accessing Azure AD. This is exactly the last step where we check as a normal user, for instance, the Active Directory in the cloud, if the certain user object is already there, and if yes, how long it took to synchronize this stuff. So those are the three components basically. And at the bottom you have the task settings, and the task settings are just containing two fields. So the first field, of course, which user object OfficeExpert should modify. As said, you need to register first the user object, which is also allowed to be synced into the Azure AD Cloud. And you specify here basically the email address of that account. And then last but not least, you specify also how many sync cycle it should maximum take until the user object, or until I want to have a notification alerting triggered. So for instance, after 4 cycle counts, so for instance, if I have 30 minutes as a AD Connect sync cycle definition available, then the threshold of 4 means that maximum 2 hours it can take until I want to get notified, basically. So it's an optional field here. You can specify 10 or so if you like. So It's more or less just what needs to your, or what fits your requirements basically. So whenever you have done that, it gets active. You can create as many Azure Sync Simulation as you like with using different kind of user objects here. And the bottom line is basically that you have here in the Azure Sync Simulation page then a complete big picture about how many sync simulations have taken place. So 48 out of 48 were successful basically on the 5th of December. If you go back to the past, you may see some issues occurring here. So for instance, at 4 p.m. on the 21st of November, there was an issue. So if you want to see more information about what was the issue or what could have been the issue at that point in time, you can drill down into Data Miner to see hopefully some API error events. But nevertheless, this kind of information gives you some idea of how many of your sync cycle events between your on-prem Active Directory and the cloud Active Directory is working successful or is not working successful. And that's the aim of the Azure Sync Simulation stuff, basically. So thank you.